Unit 1. According to the founding generation, a constitution should function as a higher law. In what important ways does a higher law differ from a statute enacted by a legislature? How would you distinguish between a government with a constitution and a constitutional government? What are the advantages and disadvantages of a written constitution? You may begin.
As Cicero said, there exists a law, not written down anywhere, but inborn in our hearts. Higher law, within all and over all, the basis for our Constitution and the foundation for governments around the world. Higher law is our moral code and the cornerstone of all statutes.
There are two definitions of higher law. The first is the highest or supreme law of the land. Our Constitution and statutes passed by Congress are established as the highest law of the land through the Supremacy Clause. In Arizona v. United States, national statutes were upheld over parts of Arizona's new immigration laws.
The second definition of higher law is a moral code or a set of principles to which people adhere. Higher law can be religious, such as Sharia law, which is based on the Quran. It can also be non-religious, exemplified by our Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which sets a common standard of achievement for all people in all nations.
A statute is a codified law passed by a legislative body that delineates regulations and sets repercussions, differing from higher law in several crucial ways. First, statutes are only made by a legislature, while higher law can stem from religion, morals, or court precedent, such as common law in England.
Statutes can apply to a specified group of people or location, like Jim Crow laws, while higher law can apply to a wide range of people across the world. One Nevada revised statute outlaws cell phone usage without a hands-free device, narrowing the scope of the statute to include only people in Nevada who operate motor vehicles. Statutes are derived from and intended to support higher law, and they must have substantive due process. However, as Martin Luther King stated, when man-made law is out of harmony with the moral law, civil disobedience arises.
A constitutional government is consensual, establishing individual rights of the people and the responsibility of the government to maintain those rights, and rule of law. As Aristotle proclaimed, it is more proper that the law should govern than any one of the citizens. These are traits by which the founders felt higher law differed from statutes.
Germany had the Weimar Constitution when the Enabling Act was passed, which gave Adolf Hitler the power to enact any statute without parliamentary debate, even if it conflicted with the higher law of the Constitution. Thus, Nazi Germany had a constitution but was not a constitutional government because it did not uphold higher law.
A constitutional government must also be a limited government. Those in power are subjected to the rule of law. This trait was lacking in Japan's 1890 Meiji Constitution, which permitted the emperor to dissolve the constitution at any point. Our Constitution upholds rule of law through impeachment. As stated in Article 2, Section 4, all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for high crimes and misdemeanors.
In 451 BC, the 12 tables were posted in the ancient Roman Forum as one of the first known written constitutions, providing the literate citizens access to their laws of government. A written constitution contains the outline of the government and laws in one document, providing a pathway for active citizens.
However, written constitutions cater to the literate and can be incapable of keeping up with the times. The rigid quality of our Constitution is exemplified by the women's suffrage movement, which began at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, but took 72 years to be reflected with the 19th Amendment. Controversy over the Second Amendment demonstrates the issues that arise from differing interpretations of written words.
The British unwritten constitution is made up of court precedent and various documents, including the Magna Carta of 1215. Such unwritten constitutions are far more flexible than written ones, but can be too large, scattered, and even lost, making it difficult to decipher the fundamental principles and composition of government.
Joseph Warren, a general of the Continental Army, stated this eternal truth, that public happiness depends on a virtuous and unshaken attachment to a free constitution. A government may have a written or unwritten constitution, but it must be a free one that supports higher law through statutes to be constitutional. Thank you.
Is the Constitution of the United States a higher law than those of other countries?
Do you mean that our Constitution would be a higher law for another country?
Yeah, I mean, is it a higher law than Britain? Is it higher than any other country? as we consider it?
A higher law has to be accepted by the people who are abiding by it, which means that it's a sort of unceremonial social contract that people are engaging in. And a higher law cannot be a higher law if it doesn't have the acceptance of the public. A great example of this is the differing religious higher laws. Now, Christian higher law is different from other fundamental religious groups' higher laws.
Our Constitution cannot be applied to another country because it is not their Constitution, it is ours, so our Constitution is not their higher law. However, you can look at the Universal Declaration of Rights as more of a higher law for various other countries, including our own.
Although our Constitution only applies to our country, so therefore it is higher law for the citizens of America and the people who live here. However, some of the ideas from our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence can be reflected in, or are reflected in many other countries' declarations and constitutions, such as Vietnam.
Touching on what Michael said, Martin Luther King Jr. did state that people and citizens of the United States have a duty to obey their conscience and follow a higher law than even written constitutions that could be immoral.
What is,
Go ahead.
what exactly is the transcendent higher law that we have agreed upon in the United States that is even higher than the Constitution? What is that?
The United States, the 13 original colonies were mainly founded on certain Protestant religious values. Excluding the Virginia area, which was mainly founded on, hey, there's gold in Virginia. But the New England colonies and the middle colonies were mainly founded on this Protestant religion and the work ethic behind that, that when you work hard, you are then more loved by God. Not necessarily loved by God, but that it's a good quality to work hard.
Another higher law or form of common law that exists over the United States is the Magna Carta, which was carried over into early American legal tradition with the Delaware State Constitution, which says that the common law of England shall remain in force. And the Magna Carta was a set of principles that embodied the common law in England, and that carried to the United States.
Another piece of higher law that's part of our government but not necessarily in our Constitution is the idea of classical republicanism. Our country was founded on this idea through the founding fathers who created the Declaration, which states at the end, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. People in our society carry this out today by giving back and volunteering.
The pursuit of happiness is also something that's upheld highly in America. Even in literature, we can see that the American dream is a theme that we can see over and over again.
I'm gonna change course with you a little bit. You talked in your testimony about limiting government, and I've got a question for you. How might the right to trial by jury protect individuals from an abuse of power by the government? How does that work?
In Great Britain, one of the biggest rights for the people is their right to a trial by jury. It's not a right so much for the defendant, but a right for participation in your government. Because in England, juries can acquit someone of a law that they feel is unjust in an act of protest against that law, which means that the right to trial by jury is a check on the government and limits the government because you have the power of upholding or not upholding just or unjust laws.
Trial by jury also, although it was mainly for the jurors in Great Britain, now it's mainly for the defendant. And it definitely supports the idea of checking the government, and that the people are now judging whether or not an individual has broken that law or not, rather than the government arbitrarily arresting somebody and arbitrarily charging them for something that they may or may not have committed.
The founders believed that direct democracy was more likely to ignore constitutional limits than represent democracy. Do you agree or disagree?
Direct democracy is this idea that every single person in the country would have one vote, and that they wouldn't have necessarily a vote for a representative, but a vote directly for whoever they are voting into office or whatever law is being passed.
Our Constitution actually is a mixed government, meaning it takes in the best parts of a monarchy, an aristocracy, an oligarchy, and these all come together. So it's really not a direct democracy, but a mix of many types of government.
Federalist 51 argues that people are the fountain of power, which is true, yet it isn't feasible in our country that it's so large and vast in population to have every person represented or having a direct democracy. So it works with our population to have a representative government.
Is higher law absolute?
Never. The higher law of a society shifts as the values of the society shift. There is never one fundamental higher law laid in stone, which means that higher law is never codified. It's something that's inborn within all of us. John Locke argued that we are born tabula rasa, or blank slate, and our higher law as a society is impressed upon us as we go along.
The court case Wisconsin v. Yoder is a prime example of when different higher laws intersect. Amish children could not be held to compulsory education past 8th grade because the parents' freedom of religion was more important than the state's compelling interest to educate the kids.
I think it depends on the type of higher law you're referring to. Moral higher law is absolute to the people who consent to that higher law, such as those who are religious and believe in the Ten Commandments. However, legal higher law is not absolute, and we can see this through the fact that we have had numerous revolutions throughout human history, and our Constitution even provides for it through the amendment process.
I would have to disagree with Alexis. While there is a higher law, a lot of legal higher law is absolute. For instance, Article 3, Section 3 of our Constitution outlines the only crime ever mentioned, which is treason. And Texas v. White ruled that secession, which is essentially a form of treason or waging war against the United States, is completely unconstitutional. Therefore, that higher law of our Constitution is absolute.
You talked about the social contract. Is a statute part of the social contract?
As long as we are engaging in a society where we agree to participate, aka we acknowledge that we are engaging in a social contract, then any sort of law that is passed in that government will become part of that social contract. And if we don't agree with it, we have methods of reforming or rejecting it through reform, referendum, or recall.
Statutes are only part of higher law if they uphold the higher law that people consent to. So, for example, when people emigrate here, they take the oath of allegiance to our country and they agree to be governed by the United States of America. Yet if there's a statute that doesn't uphold this higher law that they've consented to, then it is up to them through civil disobedience to change it.
Right now in Arizona, there's the idea that some children, in order to graduate high school, will have to say an oath of allegiance to the United States before graduating. Now, this shows that up until that point, maybe they weren't even aware that they were part of a social contract.
Statutes are absolutely part of the social contract, and while I personally agree with the Texas v. White that secession is not okay, the southern states used the idea that there was this statute, the Fugitive Slave Clause of the Constitution, and the Fugitive Slave Statute with the Compromise of 1850, that the northerners were not following. They were not abiding by the statute, therefore they had broken the social contract, and the southern states that felt that in that instance they were no longer part of this social contract and they could thusly secede.
Explain to me the use of civil disobedience and how it relate to protests against some concept of higher law.
One of the first examples of civil disobedience that we know of was in the ancient Roman Empire when Cicero conspired to kill the tyrannical Caesar. He did this to protect the common good and promote the general welfare of the people. So we can see this now in the Nevada State Constitution that provides for, it says it is the right of the people to reform or abolish a government that does not promote the common good.
Thomas Jefferson reflected that when he was referring to Shays' Rebellion. He said that the tree of liberty from time to time must be refreshed by the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Wouldn't stop there.
Do we have to?
Yes.
I thought this was good. I would say that higher law is very slippery, very difficult because it's very ethereal. And what I was kind of getting at with my questions about what is higher law and is it absolute, I know that Judge Beck and Danny were asking more concrete questions. I was asking you to go abstract. The idea is that the Constitution itself is a higher law, but it is not the highest law. And that this idea that there is a highest law, in a sense, we can't know, or we can't just without reason know what it is, but the way that the framers and the founders in that generation viewed it, they viewed it very scientifically, because they tended to believe in the laws of science, gravity, other laws of science. I clearly so entropy. There you go. That God or the Creator or nature that operated under the same laws, and that the way that humans must interact with each other operated in a similar manner. And that idea is very fundamental to the way that our Constitution was created. Is this idea of I don't know if you guys have ever explored Plato's cave allegory. The idea that if you reflect shadows on a cave, the shadows on a cave are just a reflection of what's actually out there, and what we have in the Constitution is just a reflection of what we should be doing to protect these natural rights to life, liberty, and property. So Lisa hit on it a little bit when she talked about pursuit of happiness, and maybe I wasn't specific enough in my question. I was kind of goading you, but what I want you guys to you had great examples in terms of contract and Constitution and statute. Think about what ultimately is a higher law that justifies revolutions and civil disobedience. You know, one man's conscience is not another man's conscience. Martin Luther King's conscience is not Gandhi's conscience, is not the conscience of a guy in the woods by himself, you know, with a bunch of guns. So, you know, is it really a matter of what we decide individually that higher law is, or does something exist beyond our own ability to create positively that is higher law that frames our Constitution? But you guys did a great job. I just wanted to use it as a teaching moment. So.
I'm going to be very specific. First of all, be careful about getting into patterns when you answer your questions. The first three questions, it actually got to the point where I would turn to the person because I knew you were going to be answering the question next. It went, you, and you did it 3 questions in a row. Be aware that that kind of thing is going on, because after a while, it actually was a little distracting to me. As I said, I started going, okay, you next, because I knew it was coming. I heard great quotes. I heard some good invocation of evidence. I didn't hear a lot of case law. I didn't hear a whole lot of constitutional citation, with the exception of Emily. Emily, you were right on some of these things. Make sure you've got good evidence to back up what it is you're saying. Emily, one thing, defendants, criminal defendants. There are other kinds of defendants. You want to make sure that it's criminal defendants. And in your testimony, you said something about Sharia law. That can have a very visceral response from a judge. You can pull some of that response by putting in another example, Mosaic law. Let's spread it out a little bit. That way we aren't targeting a single religion, and a religion that right now can, as I said, provoke a real visceral response with the judge. So
Rightly or wrongly.
Exactly so. But I thought all of you did a great job. Michael, you are thinking in very interesting ways. And it was a pleasure to listen to you answer these questions. You guys did a great job.
I enjoyed the whole conversation. You had me hooked in what you were saying and how you were saying. You had conviction to what you were saying, whether it was right, wrong, or whatever it was. You sold me, and you know I just thought you were just passionate about what you had to say, and it came across. And I think that's something you need to maintain. Great eye contact, and even though you did get into a little of the pattern thing, everybody had great answers and very well balanced as to, what you had to say.
Lisa Bat's great cleanup.
Yeah.
She does. The other thing, did you guys like this format? You were very comfortable
Yeah, you
with
were.
it. And in fact, when you were talking, many times you were here because you're so passionate about what you're saying. Don't be afraid to do that. Show that in your answers, okay? And this was really comfortable. I think you guys did a very good job with that.
You guys are done. Good job.
Good luck.